Good afternoon and welcome back to the Green Horizons Summit. It's been quite a day. Finance Day at COP26. We've seen commitments from 450 financial organisations from 45 countries. We've also seen the announcement of the UK as being a net zero finance centre, the mandating of disclosures on climate, and a host of other initiatives in relation to climate and green finance. And we're joined today by a tremendous panel to talk about whether or not we actually have the capacity to make the changes that are now required of us. To my far right, we have Ben, who is the founding director of the School for Sustainable Finance at Oxford, and then Elaina Elzinga, who is a principal at the Wellcome Trust responsible for agriculture and absolute return, and also recently was responsible for leading Wellcome's move to decarbonise their investment portfolio. And then Sarah Gordon, who is the Chief Executive of the Impact Investing Institute, an organisation set up in 2019 to encourage investment with a measurable positive impact in both environmental and social senses, as well as delivering a financial return. And to start with, I'd quite like Ben to turn to you and ask you about the systemic capacity that we've got. Have we got the systemic capacity to actually deliver? Have the measures that have been put through today and in the last few days here provided enough of a framework for the investment sector to actually deliver on the promises that it's making?
Sure, Will. Well, thank you for inviting me along and good to be here. I mean, that's a really big question. I think one way of answering it is to think about what we've been trying to do through COP26, since Paris actually, over the last 6 years. You could argue that it's all been about trying to build up systematic capabilities in different bits of the world to deliver climate action. And building those capabilities is not easy. And you can see here in Glasgow, pretty much every sector, every issue has different coalitions working together to solve problems. And those coalitions involve governments, they involve civil society organisations, they involve companies, they involve different types of financial institutions, they involve regulators. And some of those coalitions are far advanced, some of them are less advanced. But what we're trying to do through this process is exercise those muscles, get people delivering real economy action, and the financial system obviously has a really important role to play in supporting that. Some of the announcements today, I think, will make a big difference. I think the announcement today from the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, in particular around net zero transition plans. Now, this is a great way of getting a workout as an organisation and building that capacity to deliver, because institutions will have to, whether they're a large company, listed, non-listed, an asset owner, an asset manager, they'll have to disclose net zero transition plans, and that means they'll have to systematically think about what they need to do, how they're going to do it, and that will, I think, be very positive. Now, the question then is, what's a good transition plan? How do we measure that? And also, critically, how do we get other countries to adopt the same requirements?
And you've set up, or there is being set up, I think, a task force to think about what a good transition plan looks like. Any sort of early indications of how that might work and when the results of that might come through?
Sure. So in his speech, he announced a transition plan task force that's been established. An organisation that I direct, the UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investment, is co-running the secretariat with an NGO called E3G. And we're starting our work straight after COP, and we'll be delivering our conclusions before the end of 2022. And the focus is on that question: what is a good transition plan, and what are the metrics that are going to be required to measure progress? And that's actually was a super interesting and important question. And you'll want metrics that can track progress irrespective of which sector of the economy you're in, but also you'll probably want metrics that are very sector specific.
Yeah. And we saw also an announcement about metrics and standards from TCFD again today, additionally. So is the ambition to ensure that there is alignment between metrics rather than a sort of proliferation of different metrics that different organisations will be required to find?
So, alignment of metrics, of standards is really important, and we also had some really big announcements today, including with the International Sustainability Standards Board, and we'll talk about those, I'm sure.
Yeah, great. Sarah, when you talk to organisations in this field about the work that they're doing and their ambitions, do you get a sense that they are organisationally prepared, that they have the structures within them they have, because people are declaring commitments, but do they always have the sort of the working parts there in place ready to actually meet those commitments?
Well, I think the answer is that organisations vary enormously in where they are in their strategies on this. And I think one of the things that Ben said around the just transition, having transition plans is absolutely critical, because as we know, at the moment, a number of organisations have come up with their targets and they say we're going to be net zero by 2030 or by 2050, but actually looking at the building blocks of that is incredibly difficult. And I was just talking to an asset manager earlier this afternoon who was saying, we've come up with our commitment, but it's much further out than we wanted it to be, because actually we think to actually achieve those building blocks to get to that net zero position is actually going to take us that long. Well, frankly, I applaud that honesty, because I think the problem is otherwise you have a number of organisations who've made the big commitments but haven't actually thought through the very difficult practical hurdles that you'll need to jump through. And I mean, and as you'll know, we at the Impact Investing Institute, we're very much about trying to provide practical help and guidance and tools to help organisations on that journey, and investors and indeed policymakers. But it's difficult doing this stuff. So I think it's fantastic that there's going to be a gold standard. I think it's fantastic you're involved in it, and to really hold those organisations who've made the commitment without doing that detailed thinking, frankly hold their feet to the fire a bit, but also to support them in developing the capacities and the expertise to do the difficult things that are necessary to get there.
And you're talking about sort of asset managers, but you also spend a lot of time talking to asset owners.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the capital that we're talking about is owned by the asset owners. It's their money, it's not the asset managers' money. The asset owners, are they ready to enable this whole system to function? Because a lot of the time we still see hesitancy within the asset owner community, in particular in relation perhaps to fiduciary duty, and whether or not asset owners feel as though the trustees feel as though they are holding to their fiduciary duty to their beneficiaries. Is that an area where more work is still needed to be done?
Absolutely. I mean, I would just say the money that asset owners have is not their money either. No. It's our money.
It's true.
And it's incredibly important that we all are empowered to use that money in the way that we feel is right. Asset owners, like asset managers, like all of us, have there's been such demonstrable change over the last 2 years, even the sort of 2 years since the Institute was launched in November 2019. You've really seen a vast number of asset owners, as well as asset managers, as well as individuals, really engage very seriously with the challenges. The issue is that still, for many asset owners, pension trustees, for example, that they feel a level of discomfort around whether, for example, impact investment is compatible with their fiduciary duty, which is really unhelpful. So, even if they want to do impact, I mean, as you know, because you've been involved, at the Institute, we worked with a number of leading law firms to produce a legal paper, which is in a sense a reassurance paper that says, even with the current definition of fiduciary duty, it is compatible with trustees' fiduciary duty, with impact investment. But the challenge is that that's quite a journey to get there. And really, what you want is a version of fiduciary duty that is actually going to make it easy. Make it easy for asset owners to do this, because that's what we all, that's what they need to do.
Yeah. Elaina, this is a journey that you've just been on or been through with the Wellcome Trust. fiduciary duty sort of in some respect a concern or an issue or sort of something that you have had in mind. But what are some of the drivers and barriers that you found when thinking about how are we actually going to make this commitment? What is it going to need for us to stand this up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I mean, to set the scene, Wellcome exists to fund charity to improve human health and save lives around the world. And in doing so, we fund research into combating 3 major health challenges, of which climate change is one. And the links between climate change and human health are not yet particularly well publicised or understood, but they are very real, and they are real today, and they're going to become more so in the future. So in funding this research to the tune of about £1 billion per year, this comes from our investment portfolio of about £30 billion, and we run that, and our fiduciary duty is to run that to maximise our long-term risk-adjusted returns, so we can continue doing this in perpetuity. Now, to your point, it's very important that to us, because of who we are and because of our mission, but also because we believe that the companies that are going to produce the most sustainable long-term financial returns need to get onto a net zero glide path. And so it was critical that we come up with a net zero plan for our investments portfolio that, to Sarah's point, was really credible and had substance behind it, and was realistic rather than putting forward some bold and high-level ambitions. So just to bring it life a bit briefly, there were 3 key features, I think, which might be useful to share with other asset owners, and the strategies available online. First of all, in running a very diversified portfolio that runs from direct investments in public equities and property through to third-party managers in hedge funds and venture capital and private equity, we had to be very clear about what scope of emissions are we taking responsibility for each asset class. So for public equities, this was scopes 1, 2, and 3, where these are significant, as recommended by SBTi. But then critically, we also took that definition through to the underlying portfolio companies within our third-party managers. So we're very, very clear on what we're looking to influence. Second key point is on measurement. We could have spent years trying to come up with the optimal data looking across our whole portfolio, but really we needed to get on with it because we know what direction we need to move in. So while some of the data is around it for public equities, we decided to use a high-level portfolio metric looking at the percentage of our portfolio by value with a net zero target, both company declared and then science-based. And those numbers for us as of last year were 21% company declared and 13% science-based. And then finally, for us, this is really about purposeful engagement to have real-world impact. Engagement typically applies to public equities, but we think that we can have the most influence right now in the unlisted part of our portfolio, working with our private equity managers. Yep. So hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour of
thank you. How did you find that you had all the necessary skills already within the team, or did you have to sort of bring additional skills in? And did you have many climate experts on the team that were able to assist?
Yeah, so we've been thinking about climate risks as part of our broader consideration at investment due diligence stage for many, many years, but we certainly did have to escalate our game. Our culture and our strategy for doing this is not to kind of parachute in a team of consultants or even hire a dedicated ESG specialist, but rather to kind of train the professionals that have the relationships with the managers, with the underlying companies, and to give them the toolkit and the language to be able to engage and to push. So it was a bit of self-teaching, it was a bit of learning from our partners, and it is a bit of learning from our partners who are furthest ahead, and applying best practice across different asset classes. Very much a journey that we're still on, and we're looking for both more formal sources of education as well as just learning on the job through different conversations as we go.
And what are some of those formal routes? And in sort of formal academic programs such as the one that Ben runs at Oxford, or other sort of qualifications and so on as well?
Yeah, so that is a good example. I was at a conference in Cambridge last week on systemic risks, which was also very eye-opening. And actually, I think particularly for the most senior levels of CIOs, it really helps focus their mind, giving them those sound bites and trying to translate some of the facts into numbers and then into financial impact across our portfolio. There are some, we've increasing number of people in our team who are looking at the CFA ESG qualification as well. But I think we'll be doing more research on things like that we can use to add to our knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. Ben, when you talk to people, do you find that you've got individuals who have a tremendous knowledge of climate and science and then finance, and how well are those two worlds now coming together? What can we do, and what are you doing at the Smith School to encourage that?
So those two worlds do need to come together, and they need to come together very quickly. And we're doing our best to accelerate that. The centre that I mentioned before, the UK Centre for Greening Finance and Investment, was set up in large part to try and make sure that all of this science that's going on, we've collectively spent tens of billions of dollars on climate and environmental science, satellites, climate models, you name it. Not all of that's going to be useful for finance, but some of that data, some of that analysis will be useful for financial decision making. Very, very small proportion of that gets its way into finance. We need to change that. A key part of changing that is helping people to understand how they use this data. How should they use data appropriately for different use cases, whether they're in a bank or an asset manager or whatever it might be. And that's actually is quite a big challenge, because people are starting to look at trying to measure physical climate risk in portfolios. They're starting to look at biodiversity and nature. Yes. And actually speaking to the climate scientists in our team, and I'm not a climate scientist, obviously, as you can probably tell, but they are actually shocked at what people are doing with their models and the outputs, and they're sort of like, you can't claim that level of precision with these data sets. Are you crazy? These finance people don't know what they're doing. So we've still got a long way to go, and there are lots of different ways of doing that. So these sort of the conference is obviously very important. Shorter courses at Oxford, we do everything from we've got a new master's program, but we also do shorter exec ed online, in person. We've also just set up a new academy, actually, that's focused specifically on policymakers, regulators, supervisors, civil society who are working on sustainable finance, because those guys, as we have seen today with the announcements, are actually really important for moving things in the right direction. And if they don't have access to this capacity building and training, they'll design policies and regulations that aren't very helpful.
Actually, Ben, if I could put in a request, I think one of the challenges we have is publicising to everyone internally and externally that's not just about the fossil fuel sector and those that are financing the fossil fuel sector. Yeah. I think to the extent we can get more data about the susceptibility to climate risks across different supply chains, even though for those companies where scopes 1 and 2 aren't that high, but actually their scope 3 is very high, I think that's the sort of thing that would be really useful to help focus minds.
Sectoral approaches are very important, and the transition pathways, the risks, the metrics, the data, the policies, the regulations, all of this is sector by sector, and not all sectors are the same, and some sectors have good data, others less so, and collectively we need to navigate that.
But it does feel as though it's sort of all coming together a bit, that lots of different lines of thought and work are being operated at the same time, which should allow us to have a pretty good framework for building capacity within a fairly short time period. I don't know, Sarah, in terms of impact, which again is a little bit different, are you finding that sort of understanding of impact is a barrier to engagement with impact, and sort of even to understanding what impact is?
Yes, absolutely, definitely. And I mean, it is still the case, I mean, not at COP, where, I hope and suspect that everyone here knows what impact investment is, and is aware of, how it can be used to deliver positive social and environmental outcomes. But I think in the general public, certainly, if you say what's impact investment, they still don't know the answer. So, I mean, the big challenge that one of the challenges that we were set up to address is precisely that awareness raising around what impact investment is and what it actually can achieve. And one of the things I was thinking with the discussion you were having earlier about education is that I really also think there's a huge need for educating people, individuals, about to be more financially literate themselves, and secondly, to really understand the power that they have with their own money to deliver change. And it's not just in their pensions or in their investments and savings more broadly, it's in all their financial decisions. And I think on the whole, people in the UK and elsewhere actually they don't feel empowered to use their money for good, and yet we know that's what they want to do. So I mean, the way that we're addressing what we're trying to do, this is, it's a collaborative project. There are many actors, and we're all going to have to focus on this, and are focusing on this. But we have a learning hub, as you know, at the Impact Investing Institute, where you can go to look for basic definitions of impact investing, but also critically examples and case studies of what impact investment across asset classes, across sectors, across geographies actually looks like, what change it's delivering on the ground, as well as a financial return. And that's, I think, incredibly important for asset owners, for example, like yourselves. It's pretty useless being told what to do, but if you're shown that other asset owners or asset managers have successfully engaged in impact investing in geographies that you're interested in sectors that you're interested in, that can be a really persuasive and powerful tool.
You mentioned collaboration, and obviously we have all the different alliances. The finance sector is not a sector that perhaps was known for its sort of collaborative nature. Do you think that is something that has changed sort of significantly in the face of a challenge that the whole finance system is trying to address at the same time? There's a recognition that actually there is, the market needs to advance, and therefore the market needs to work as one to get us to a certain point before we start competing with each other again. I don't know, Ben, do you want to?
Well, look, I mean, there's clearly a lot of, there's a pre-competitive space where people are working together. I think there's a really important need for regulation to make sure that, everyone's brought on board. But we will have, and do need, bits of the system to differentiate and compete, and there will be leaders and there will be laggards, and we'll be ratcheting up ambition and the quality of practice as we go. I think one of the things that will happen now that we've got 130 trillion of assets under GFANs, you've got some real leaders in that group. You've got some people that are just squeaking in, and they're all in the same group. Now, how helpful is that? Obviously, it is helpful for some things, but we are going to have to differentiate again, I think, and do so soon.
It's also, don't you think it's about, that what you said about competition? I mean, actually it's getting, and lots of financial services industry actors understand this already, this is actually about competitive advantage. I mean, of course, there's got to be collaboration, and organisations like ours, we must collaborate. But what in the financial services industry, I frankly feel it's very difficult to get lepers to change their spots, and one of their actual USPs is trying to outcompete each other, and that's what gets their juices going. And that's actually an incredibly powerful lever, because if you are not on the front foot on this, on ESG broadly, but on impact, on net zero, you are really falling behind, and you're going to be outcompeted. So I think and I think it's a huge motivation for some of the organisations that have signed up to GFANs, and quite right too. So you can harness that momentum as well as the desire for collaboration.
Elaina, the view at Wellcome on sort of collaborative activity?
Yeah, I think on the asset owner side, because we don't typically directly compete for assets or for capital, we are generally a collaborative bunch. And again, I've been part of a number of conversations as we try and align different approaches to net zero, make sense of the different metrics and what we should be focusing on. I really hope to increasingly work with other asset owners where we're commonly invested in the same manager or same company to push certain specific points and drive towards best practice. So I think that's a really important and growing strand of how we deliver on this target. I would agree, though, within the companies and the asset managers we invest in, I probably see it more as an opportunity for differentiation and therefore competition. And you can see there will be winners and losers within every sector. And you can already see kind of cost of capital, valuation multiples changing within sectors, partly as a result of how sophisticated companies and management teams are being on these topics.
Great. We only have a few minutes left. Capacity building, what are you still worried about? And is there anything else that we can expect from COP that might support the capacity of the financial system to actually act. Any news or any advance on carbon pricing mechanisms?
Well, look, I mean, there's a huge amount still to do. The announcements today are really very positive, but if you think about it, we've got to turn these big numbers into action, and we're still very far from that. And so I think this is the end of the beginning, and there's been a huge amount of progress over the last 5 years in particular, but there's a lot to do, and yeah, it's daunting. I mean, I think what I'm hoping, of course, with after COP is that people kind of feel energized to continue. It's been, I think, for many organizations quite a tiring time getting ready for COP and delivering COP. So let's reconvene in December and crack on.
Yeah. So Sarah, any concern that we are in the world of green wishing? What do you want to see for us to move beyond that?
I mean, it's, the commitments are fantastic, as Ben says, but, we're not shifting anything like the amount of capital that we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals not just in the developing world, although the challenges there are particularly acute, but also across the globe. And we're particularly interested also in building on the momentum around green and net zero. I mean, Ben mentioned the biodiversity crisis, but also more broadly to think about the social consequences and the social opportunities and mitigating the negative social consequences of the transition to net zero. And really, there are huge opportunities around jobs, around skills, around access to infrastructure, to clean energy. And we really need to start, I think, thinking about the transition in a more holistic way, and in terms of a just transition that's fair and inclusive.
Thank you, Elaina. As an investment professional, what would your advice be to other investment professionals about how they can build their own capacity to operate in the world that we're moving into, to contribute to the transition to net zero?
I think get involved with many different conversations, speak to other asset owners, do your research around, I mean, for us, quite a lot, sadly, of the climate solutions related investments are just a bit too small for us right now to move the needle, but we're learning a huge amount from having these conversations, and hopefully it won't be long before they are of a scale where we can invest in them. So I think use the resources available, you take a long-term perspective and have as many conversations as possible.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. It's been a very extraordinary day, filled with sort of exciting news about incredible opportunities for us to actually deliver important change. And thank you for your comments on how we can go about that. Ben, Elaina, Sarah, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.